The autumn wind carried the scent of fallen leaves through the streets of San Antonio, Texas, as George Strait pulled his black pickup truck into the parking lot of University Hospital. The iconic country music legend had been in town for a recording session at a local studio when his longtime friend and tour manager, Tom Mitchell, had called with an unusual request. "George, I know this might sound strange, but would you consider making a hospital visit? There's a little boy here whose mother is, well, she's not doing too well. The kid has been singing your songs to her every day, and the nurses thought maybe—" Tom's voice had trailed off, but George understood immediately. In his 40-year career, he had made countless hospital visits, understanding that sometimes music could provide comfort where words failed. The king of country music had never been one to seek publicity for his charitable acts, preferring to help quietly, away from the cameras and reporters. As he walked through the hospital's automatic doors, George adjusted his black cowboy hat and straightened his pressed shirt. The familiar antiseptic smell of the hospital brought back memories of his own family's struggles with illness over the years. He approached the information desk, where a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes looked up from her computer. "Good afternoon, I'm George Strait. I believe Tom Mitchell called about visiting the Johnson family." The nurse's eyes widened slightly before she composed herself professionally. "Of course, Mr. Strait. Mrs. Rodriguez in the pediatric ward has been expecting you. The family is in room 314 on the 3rd floor." As George made his way to the elevator, he reflected on the phone call that had brought him here. Tom had explained that 8-year-old Marcus Johnson had been practically living at the hospital for the past 3 weeks, while his mother, Sarah, battled complications from a severe car accident. The boy's father had died 2 years earlier in military service overseas, leaving Marcus and his mother as each other's only family. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 3rd floor, and George stepped out into a corridor lined with colorful murals of cartoon characters and inspirational messages. Despite the cheerful decorations, the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. He could hear the distant sounds of medical equipment beeping and the quiet conversations of medical staff going about their important work. Room 314 was at the end of the hall, and as George approached, he could hear a small voice singing softly. He paused outside the partially open door, not wanting to intrude on what seemed to be an intimate moment. The voice was young, but carried a maturity beyond its years, singing the words to Amarillo Morning with surprising accuracy and genuine emotion. George peered through the crack in the door and saw a small boy with tousled brown hair sitting beside a hospital bed. His mother lay still, connected to various machines that monitored her vital signs. The boy held her hand gently while singing, his voice never wavering despite the tears that occasionally slipped down his cheeks. "I could take this time to tell you about the things you never see, but the morning sun is rising like a red bird on the wing." The sight struck George deeply. He had heard his songs performed by countless artists over the years, in concert halls and recording studios, but never had the words carried such raw, honest emotion. This wasn't a performance, it was a prayer, a desperate attempt by a young boy to reach his unconscious mother through the power of music. George knocked gently on the doorframe and stepped into the room. Marcus looked up, his eyes red from crying, and for a moment seemed confused by the presence of a stranger. Then recognition dawned on his face, and his mouth fell open in disbelief. Are you really George Strait?" the boy whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break what seemed like an impossible dream. George smiled warmly and removed his hat as he approached the bed. "Yes, son, I am, and I heard you singing my song just now. You've got a beautiful voice." Marcus's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they seemed to carry hope rather than despair. "I've been singing to Mom every day. The doctors say she can hear me even though she can't wake up yet. I thought maybe if I sang your songs, she loves your music so much, maybe it would help her get better." George felt his throat tighten with emotion as he looked at the brave young boy and his mother lying peacefully in the hospital bed. Sarah Johnson appeared to be in her early 30s, with blonde hair spread across the pillow and a serene expression on her face, despite the medical equipment surrounding her. "Your mum has excellent taste in music," George said, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "And I think you're absolutely right about her being able to hear you. Music has a way of reaching people even when nothing else can." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked up at George with curiosity. "How did you know to come here? Did someone tell you about my mom?" George pulled up a chair beside the boy, speaking in the calm, measured tone that had made him beloved by millions of fans. "A friend of mine heard about what you've been doing for your mother, and he thought I might want to meet the young man who's been taking such good care of her." He was right. For the next few minutes, George listened as Marcus told him about his mother, how she worked 2 jobs to support them after his father died, how she always made time to help him with homework despite being exhausted, and how she would sing along to George Strait songs while cooking dinner or doing household chores. "She knows all your songs by heart," Marcus said proudly. "Sometimes we would have singing contests in the car, and she would always win because she remembered all the words perfectly." George found himself genuinely moved by the boy's devotion to his mother and impressed by his maturity in handling such a difficult situation. "Marcus, would you mind if I sang something for your mum? Maybe we could sing together." The boy's face lit up with excitement. "Really? You would do that?" "I'd be honored," George replied, meaning every word. As the afternoon sun filtered through the hospital room window, casting warm light across the sterile environment, George Strait began to sing "Check Yes or No," one of his most beloved hits. His rich, familiar voice filled the room, and Marcus joined in enthusiastically, his young voice harmonizing beautifully with the country music legends. The nursing staff began to gather quietly in the hallway, drawn by the sound of the impromptu concert. Several nurses wiped away tears as they listened to the touching scene unfolding in room 314. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Sarah Johnson's attending physician, stood among them, amazed by the transformation she saw in young Marcus. For the past 3 weeks, she had watched the boy struggle with fear and loneliness, trying to be brave while facing the possibility of losing his only remaining parent. Now, singing alongside his musical hero, Marcus seemed to have found a renewed sense of hope and strength. As the song ended, George noticed that one of Sarah's monitors showed a slight change in her heart rate. Dr. Hernandez stepped into the room, having observed the same thing. "That's interesting," she said quietly to George while checking Sarah's chart. "Her vitals have been very stable for days, but just now we saw some fluctuation in her heart rate and brain activity. It could be coincidental, but maybe she really can hear us," Marcus said hopefully. Dr. Hernandez smiled at the boy's optimism. "The brain is a remarkable thing, Marcus. There's still so much we don't understand about consciousness and how patients in comas process external stimuli. What I can tell you is that your mother's condition has been slowly improving over the past week, and continued positive stimulation certainly won't hurt." George stayed in the room for nearly 2 hours, singing songs, telling stories about his career, and listening to Marcus share memories about his mother. The boy's spirits had lifted dramatically, and George could see a renewed determination in his eyes, a belief that his mother would indeed recover. As visiting hours drew to a close, George knew he had to leave, but he could see the anxiety returning to Marcus's face at the prospect of being alone again. "Marcus, I want you to have something," George said, reaching into his wallet and pulling out a small card. "This has my personal phone number on it. I want you to call me and let me know how your mom is doing, okay? And if you need anything at all, you call me." The boy looked at the card in amazement, holding it carefully as if it were made of precious metal. "Really?" I can really call you? Absolutely. In fact, I insist on it. You're taking care of the most important person in your world, and that makes you pretty special in my book. As George prepared to leave, he turned back to Sarah's bedside and spoke softly, as if she could hear every word. Sarah, you've got an incredible son here. He's been taking such good care of you, and he's going to need you to get better soon. We're all pulling for you. Marcus walked George to the elevator, chattering excitedly about the songs they had sung together and asking questions about George's career. As the elevator doors opened, George knelt down to the boy's level. Remember what I told you about calling me, okay? And keep singing to your mom. I have a feeling she's listening more than we know. As George drove home through the darkening Texas evening, he couldn't stop thinking about the brave little boy he had just met. There was something about Marcus Johnson that reminded him of the importance of family, of the power of music to heal, and of the responsibility that came with his success and influence. He made a mental note to call Tom in the morning to arrange for the hospital to receive an anonymous donation to help with Sarah's medical expenses. But more than that, he found himself genuinely invested in this family's story and determined to see it through to a positive conclusion. The next morning, George woke with Marcus and Sarah still on his mind. After his usual coffee and review of the day's schedule, he found himself dialing the hospital to check on Sarah's condition. While patient information was confidential, he was able to speak with Dr. Hernandez, who confirmed that Sarah had shown continued signs of improvement overnight. It's remarkable, really, the doctor explained. We've seen some increased brain activity that we hadn't observed before yesterday afternoon. While I can't make any definitive statements about causation, the timing is certainly interesting. George felt a surge of hope and decided to clear his schedule for another hospital visit. This time, however, he wanted to do something special, something that might provide Marcus with an even stronger connection to hope and healing. The morning light filtered through the hospital room windows as Marcus Johnson sat in his usual spot beside his mother's bed, holding her hand and humming softly. It had been 18 hours since George Strait's visit, and the boy seemed transformed. Where there had once been despair and exhaustion, now there was a quiet confidence, a belief that something miraculous was possible. Nurse Patricia Rodriguez, who had been caring for Sarah since the beginning of her stay, noticed the change immediately when she came in for the morning rounds. Marcus was sitting up straighter, his eyes brighter, and for the first time in weeks, he had eaten a full breakfast. "Good morning, Marcus," she said warmly, checking Sarah's IV and noting her vital signs. "You seem different today. How are you feeling?" Marcus looked up with a smile that hadn't been seen in room 314 for nearly a month. "I feel hopeful, Miss Patricia. George Strait came to see us yesterday, and he sang with me for Mom. He said she can hear us, and I believe him." Patricia had heard about the famous visitor from the other nurses, and while she maintained professional skepticism about miraculous recoveries, she couldn't deny that Sarah's numbers had shown improvement since the previous afternoon. "Well, hope is a powerful medicine," she said, gently adjusting Sarah's blanket. "And your mother is a fighter. She's been showing small signs of improvement all week." As Patricia finished her rounds, Dr. Hernandez entered the room with Sarah's morning test results. The neurosurgeon had been cautiously optimistic about Sarah's progress, but the latest brain scans showed something that made her reconsider her prognosis entirely. "Marcus, I have some very good news," Dr. Hernandez said, pulling up a chair beside the boy. "Your mother's brain activity has increased significantly over the past 24 hours. The swelling has reduced more than we expected, and her body is responding better to treatment." Marcus gripped his mother's hand tighter, tears of joy beginning to form in his eyes. "Does that mean she's going to wake up soon?" "I can't make any promises about timing," the doctor replied carefully. but these are the best indicators we've seen since she arrived. I'm more optimistic today than I've been in weeks." After Dr. Hernandez left to continue her rounds, Marcus settled back into his chair and began singing softly again. He had been working his way through George Strait's catalog, choosing songs that reminded him of happy times with his mother. Today, he decided to sing "I Cross My Heart," remembering how his mother used to say it was the most romantic song ever written. Halfway through the second verse, Marcus noticed something that made his heart skip. His mother's fingers seemed to twitch slightly in his hand. He stopped singing and watched intently, holding his breath. "Mom, did you move your hand? Can you hear me?" For a moment there was nothing. Then, so subtly that Marcus almost missed it, Sarah's fingers squeezed his hand, just barely but definitely intentional. Marcus jumped up from his chair, nearly knocking it over in his excitement. "Nurse, doctor, come quick! Mum squeezed my hand!" Within minutes, room 314 was filled with medical staff. Dr. Hernandez ran several quick tests, checking Sarah's reflexes and responses. While the signs were subtle, there was no denying that Sarah Johnson was showing signs of emerging from her coma. "This is very encouraging," Dr. Hernandez told Marcus, as the other staff members began updating Sarah's chart and adjusting her treatment plan. "We're going to continue monitoring her closely, but this could be the beginning of her recovery." News of Sarah's improvement spread quickly through the pediatric ward, where Marcus had become something of a beloved fixture over the past 3 weeks. Nurses, orderlies, and even other families had been touched by the young boy's devotion to his mother, and everyone was celebrating this small but significant victory. Later that afternoon, Marcus remembered the card George Strait had given him. With trembling hands, he dialed the number, hardly believing he was calling one of the biggest stars in country music. "Hello," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Mr. Strait, this is Marcus Johnson. You came to see my mom yesterday in the hospital." "Marcus, of course, son. How are you doing? How's your mother?" Marcus could barely contain his excitement as he told George about the morning's events, the improved test results, the hand squeeze, and Dr. Hernandez's optimism about Sarah's recovery. "That's wonderful news, Marcus," George said, and his genuine happiness was evident in his voice. "I'm so proud of you for not giving up on her. You've been her strength through all of this." "Mr. Strait, do you think, would it be possible for you to come back? I know you're probably really busy, but I think Mom might be able to hear us better now, and maybe if we sang together again." George didn't hesitate. "I'll be there this afternoon. And Marcus, I'm bringing a few friends with you. I think your mom deserves something special." When George arrived at the hospital 3 hours later, he wasn't alone. With him were 2 members of his touring band, his longtime fiddle player Jake Morrison and acoustic guitarist Tommy Chen, along with a small sound system and several acoustic instruments. Marcus's eyes went wide when he saw the entourage approaching room 314. "Are we going to have a real concert?" "If your mum's up for it, absolutely," George replied with a grin. "Every lady deserves to have her favorite songs played just for her." Dr. Hernandez gave permission for the impromptu performance, noting that positive stimulation could indeed be beneficial for Sarah's recovery. As the musicians set up their equipment in the room, other patients and families began gathering in the hallway, drawn by the excitement and the promise of live music. George started with "Amarillo Morning," the song Marcus had been singing when he first arrived. This time, however, the rich sound of live instruments filled the room, creating a warmth and depth that made the hospital feel less clinical and more like home. Marcus sang along with confidence, his voice blending beautifully with George's as Jake's fiddle added melodic flourishes and Tommy's guitar provided a gentle rhythm. As they moved through the song, both musicians noticed something remarkable. Sarah's heart rate monitor showed a steady, rhythmic pattern that seemed to match the tempo of the music. "Look at that," whispered Dr. Hernandez to Nurse Rodriguez. Her vital signs are more stable than they've been since she arrived. It's like her body is responding to the rhythm. For the next hour, the impromptu concert continued. George and his musicians played some of his biggest hits: Check Yes or No, All My Exes Live in Texas, and The Chair, while Marcus sang along and held his mother's hand. The hallway outside the room filled with hospital staff, other patients and families, all drawn to the magical atmosphere that music had created in the sterile environment. During a quiet moment between songs, George knelt beside Sarah's bed and spoke directly to her, as if she were fully conscious and listening. "Sarah, I want you to know that you have raised an incredible young man. Marcus has shown more courage and love in the past few weeks than most people show in a lifetime. He's been your voice, your strength, and your hope. But now it's time for you to come back to him. He needs his mom." As George spoke, several people in the room noticed that Sarah's breathing seemed to deepen and her facial expression appeared more peaceful. Dr. Hernandez made notes on her chart, documenting the continued improvement in Sarah's condition. As the afternoon turned to evening, the musicians began packing up their equipment. George spent a few more minutes with Marcus, talking about music, family, and the importance of never giving up hope. "Mr. Strait," Marcus said as George prepared to leave, "do you think my mom will really be okay?" George looked at the boy seriously, understanding the weight of the question. "Marcus, I can't promise you what the future holds, but I can tell you that your mother is fighting to come back to you, and she's got the best reason in the world. She's got you. That's more powerful than any medicine." As George left the hospital that evening, he felt a deep sense of connection to the Johnson family that went beyond celebrity and fan. This was about human kindness, the power of music to heal, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. That night, Sarah Johnson's condition continued to improve. Her brain activity increased, her vital signs stabilized, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she showed signs of entering natural sleep patterns rather than unconsciousness. Marcus slept in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand and dreaming of the day she would open her eyes and speak his name again. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Dr. Hernandez arrived for rounds with a smile on her face and test results that exceeded everyone's expectations. "Marcus," she said, gently shaking the boy awake, "I need you to sit up and listen carefully. Your mother's latest brain scans show significant improvement. The swelling has reduced dramatically, and her brain function is approaching normal levels. I believe she may wake up very soon, possibly within the next day or two." Marcus rubbed his eyes, making sure he had heard correctly. "Really? She's really going to wake up?" "I'm very optimistic," Dr. Hernandez replied. "Her body has made remarkable progress in just 2 days. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it." As news of Sarah's improvement spread throughout the hospital, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Nurses who had watched him maintain his vigil, other families who had been touched by his dedication, and hospital staff who had come to consider him part of their extended family. But the person Marcus most wanted to share the news with was George Strait. He dialed the number on the card with shaking fingers, hoping the country music star would be available to hear the update. "Marcus," George answered on the second ring. "How's your mom doing?" "Mr. Strait, she's getting better. The doctor says she might wake up in the next day or two. Her brain scans look really good, and she's been moving more and her breathing is stronger and—" Marcus's words tumbled out in an excited rush, and George found himself smiling as he listened to the boy's joy and relief. "That's the best news I've heard in a long time, son," George said. "You've been so strong through all of this. Your mom is going to be so proud of you when she wakes up." "Will you come see us again when she's awake?" Marcus asked hopefully. "I want her to meet you and thank you for everything you've done." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," George replied, and he meant it completely. As Marcus hung up the phone, he settled back into his chair beside his mother's bed and began singing again. This time, however, his voice carried a different quality. Not the desperate hope of the past weeks, but the confident joy of someone who knew that everything was going to be all right. The third morning after George Strait's visit brought with it an electric atmosphere in room 314. Marcus had barely slept, not from worry this time, but from anticipation. Throughout the night, his mother had shown increasingly encouraging signs. Her breathing had become more natural. Her face had relaxed into what looked like peaceful sleep rather than unconsciousness. And twice he could have sworn he saw her eyes moving beneath her closed lids. At 6:47 a.m., as Marcus sat holding his mother's hand and humming, "I Can Still Make Cheyenne," something extraordinary happened. Sarah Johnson's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 3.5 weeks. "Mom?" Marcus whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might cause her to slip back into unconsciousness. "Mom, can you see me?" Sarah's eyes moved slowly, trying to focus on her surroundings. Her throat was dry from weeks of intubation, and she seemed confused by the hospital equipment surrounding her. But when her gaze finally settled on her son's face, recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by tears. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "My baby." Marcus began crying tears of pure joy, gripping his mother's hand as if he would never let go. "Mom, you're awake. You're really awake. I knew you could hear me. I've been singing to you every day, just like you taught me." Sarah tried to sit up, but found herself weak and disoriented. The past 3 weeks were a blur of darkness punctuated by distant sounds, voices, music, and most clearly, her son's voice, singing the songs they both loved. "I heard you," she managed to say, her voice growing slightly stronger. "I heard you singing. There was music, beautiful music." Before Marcus could explain about George Strait's visits, Nurse Rodriguez entered the room for the morning rounds and nearly dropped her clipboard when she saw Sarah's open eyes. "Oh my goodness, Sarah, you're awake." Patricia rushed to check Sarah's vital signs while simultaneously calling for Dr. Hernandez over the intercom. "This is wonderful. How are you feeling?" Within minutes, room 314 filled with medical staff as Dr. Hernandez conducted a thorough neurological examination. Sarah's responses were slow but appropriate. Her motor functions were intact, and while she experienced some expected confusion about the passage of time, her memory and cognitive abilities appeared unimpaired. "This is remarkable," Dr. Hernandez told both Sarah and Marcus after completing her evaluation. "Your recovery is far ahead of schedule. While we'll need to run more comprehensive tests, your initial responses are extremely encouraging." Nabi. As the medical team discussed treatment plans and next steps, Marcus stayed close to his mother's side, filling her in on everything that had happened during her unconsciousness, the accident, the extent of her injuries, and most importantly, the visits from George Strait. "George Strait was here?" Sarah asked in disbelief, her eyes widening despite her fatigue. "The George Strait came to see us?" Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "He came twice, and he brought his band the second time, and we had a whole concert right here in your room. He said he heard about how I was singing your favorite songs to you, and he wanted to help." Sarah struggled to process this information. In her wildest dreams, she never could have imagined that her country music hero would visit her hospital room, much less perform for her while she was unconscious. "He gave me his phone number," Marcus continued, pulling out the worn card that had become his most treasured possession. "He made me promise to call him when you woke up. Can I call him now?" Sarah nodded weakly, still overwhelmed by everything she was learning about the past 3 weeks. As Marcus dialed George's number, she listened to her son's side of the conversation with amazement. "Mr. Strait? She's awake! Mom is really awake and talking and everything." Marcus's excitement was infectious, bringing smiles to the faces of every medical professional in the room. "He wants to talk to you," Marcus said, carefully placing the phone near his mother's ear. "Hello, Mr. Strait," Sarah said softly, her voice still hoarse but filled with emotion. "I can't believe you visited us. Marcus told me about the concerts. I wish I could remember more clearly." George's warm voice came through the phone speaker. "Sarah, it's so good to hear your voice. Your son is the bravest, most dedicated young man I've ever met. He never gave up on you, not for a single day." "I heard the music," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Even when everything else was dark, I could hear singing. I thought I was dreaming, but it was real, wasn't it?" "It was real," George confirmed. "And if you're up for it, I'd love to come by later today to meet you properly when you're awake to enjoy it." After ending the call, Sarah spent the next several hours undergoing tests and examinations while gradually regaining her strength. The medical team was amazed by her rapid improvement, and Dr. Hernandez privately told Nurse Rodriguez that Sarah's recovery was one of the most remarkable she had witnessed in her 20-year career. "The brain is an incredible thing," she explained. "Sometimes patients need an emotional catalyst to begin the healing process. In Sarah's case, I believe her son's constant presence and the music provided that catalyst. The love and hope in that room was almost tangible." That afternoon, as promised, George Strait arrived at the hospital with a beautiful bouquet of yellow roses, the state flower of Texas, and a warm smile that immediately put Sarah at ease, despite her starstruck nervousness. "Mrs. Johnson, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you when you can meet me back," George said, taking off his hat as he entered the room. Sarah, now sitting up in bed and looking much more alert, tried to smooth her hair and wished she looked more presentable for meeting her musical hero. "Mr. Strait, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for my son. For us. Marcus told me about the concerts, and I have to say, even in my condition, those were the most beautiful performances I've ever experienced." George pulled up a chair between Sarah and Marcus, creating an intimate circle despite the clinical hospital setting. "Please call me George, and I have to tell you the honor was all mine. Your son taught me something about courage and love that I won't forget." For the next hour, the three of them talked like old friends. George shared stories from his career. Sarah talked about her work as a nurse at a different hospital across town. And Marcus beamed with pride as his two favorite people in the world got to know each other. "Marcus tells me you're a nurse yourself," George said to Sarah. "That makes what happened here even more meaningful. You dedicate your life to helping others heal, and when you needed healing, the music and your son's love brought you back." Sarah reached over to take Marcus's hand, looking at her son with new eyes. Over the past 3 weeks, while she fought to return to consciousness, he had grown up in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Dr. Hernandez told me that Marcus never left the hospital," she said to George. "He's been here every day, sleeping in that chair, singing to me, taking care of me when I couldn't take care of myself." Marcus blushed at the attention, but George nodded seriously. "Your son is remarkable, Sarah. I've met a lot of people in my career, but I've rarely encountered someone with such faith and determination. He never doubted that you would recover." As the afternoon progressed, George brought out his acoustic guitar. He had started carrying it with him on hospital visits, having learned how much comfort music could provide in difficult times. "Sarah, since you missed the concerts, would you like a private performance?" he asked with a smile. "I would love that," Sarah replied, settling back against her pillows. George began with Amarillo Morning, the song that had started everything. This time, however, Sarah was able to join in, her voice weak but true, as she sang along with her son and her musical hero. The simple acoustic guitar filled the room with warmth, transforming the sterile hospital environment into something magical. As they moved through several songs, other hospital staff began gathering in the hallway, drawn once again by the beautiful music emanating from room 314. Dr. Hernandez watched from the doorway, noting how Sarah's vitals remained strong and steady throughout the impromptu concert. "You know," Sarah said during a quiet moment between songs. "I've been a fan of your music for over 20 years, but hearing these songs now, in this place with my son, they mean something completely different. They're not just songs anymore, they're prayers answered." George felt deeply moved by her words. In his decades-long career, he had received countless accolades and awards, but few things had touched him as profoundly as this simple expression of gratitude from a mother who had nearly lost everything. "Music has always been about connecting with people," he replied. "But this experience has reminded me why I started singing in the first place. It's not about fame or recognition. It's about touching lives and bringing people together." As the day progressed into evening, George knew he needed to leave so Sarah could rest and continue her recovery. But before departing, he had one more surprise. "Sarah, Marcus, I want you both to know that this experience has meant the world to me. You've reminded me of what's truly important in life." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for Marcus's education fund. Every child who shows the kind of courage and love he's demonstrated deserves every opportunity in the world." Sarah opened the envelope and gasped when she saw the amount on the check. "George, we can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not nearly enough," George replied firmly. "Marcus has given me something priceless. He's reminded me why music matters. This is just my way of investing in his future." As George prepared to leave, he promised to stay in touch with the family and to visit again soon. "Sarah, you focus on getting better. And Marcus, you keep being the incredible young man you are. You both have a friend for life." That night, as Sarah slept naturally for the first time in nearly a month, and Marcus finally felt comfortable enough to go home with a family friend for a real night's sleep, the entire hospital buzzed with excitement about the remarkable recovery they had witnessed. Dr. Hernandez updated Sarah's chart, noting the extraordinary improvement in her condition and the role that music therapy, albeit unconventional, had played in her recovery. While she maintained her scientific objectivity, she couldn't deny that something special had happened in room 314. The nursing staff talked among themselves about the famous visitor and his genuine kindness. But more than that, they marveled at the bond between mother and son that had proven stronger than medical odds. Marcus Johnson had become a symbol of hope throughout the pediatric ward, proof that love and faith could indeed work miracles. As the week progressed, Sarah's recovery accelerated at a pace that amazed her medical team. She regained her strength quickly, her cognitive functions returned to normal, and within 10 days of awakening, she was cleared for discharge. The morning of her release, Sarah stood by the window of room 314, looking out at the San Antonio skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought her back from the brink. Marcus sat nearby, packing the few belongings they had accumulated during their extended stay. "Mom," he said quietly, "I was scared I was going to lose you too, like Dad." Sarah turned from the window and sat beside her son, pulling him close. "Marcus, what you did for me. Singing to me every day, never giving up hope, bringing George Strait into our lives. You saved me, not just medically, but in every way that matters." "The music helped, didn't it?" Marcus asked. "The music was beautiful," Sarah replied. "But it was your voice, your love that reached me. George Strait's songs were wonderful, but they mattered because they came from your heart." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sarah knew that their lives had been forever changed, not just by the accident and recovery, but by the people they had met and the love they had experienced during their darkest hours. 3 months after Sarah Johnson's miraculous recovery, life had settled into a new rhythm for the small family. Sarah had returned to her job as a pediatric nurse at Methodist Hospital, while Marcus had resumed his studies as a 4th grader at Roosevelt Elementary School. However, their experience had fundamentally changed both of them in ways that continued to unfold each day. The story of Marcus's vigil and George Strait's visits had quietly spread through the San Antonio medical community, though the family had requested that the media attention be kept to a minimum. Sarah wanted to focus on rebuilding their normal life, and George had always preferred to keep his charitable acts private. On this particular Saturday morning in January, Sarah was preparing breakfast when the phone rang. She smiled when she saw the familiar number on the caller ID. George had kept his promise to stay in touch, calling every few weeks to check on their progress. "Good morning, George," Sarah answered warmly. "Morning, Sarah. How are you and Marcus doing?" "We're doing wonderfully. I'm back to work full-time and Marcus is excelling in school. His teachers say he's shown remarkable maturity since everything happened. That doesn't surprise me at all. That young man has more character than most adults I know. Speaking of which, is he around? I have something I'd like to discuss with both of you." Sarah called Marcus to the phone, and soon both mother and son were listening eagerly to what George had to say. "I've been thinking about you two quite a bit lately," George began, "and I have a proposition for you. You know I'm planning my farewell tour, the Cowboy Rides Away tour, and I'd like to invite you both to be my special guests at the San Antonio show in June." Marcus's eyes went wide with excitement, but Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and concern. "George, that's incredibly generous, but we couldn't possibly—" "Now hold on," George interrupted gently. "Let me finish. This isn't just about giving you tickets to a show. Marcus, do you remember when we talked about your voice and how natural you are with music?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice slightly trembling with anticipation. "Well, I've been talking with my band and my management team, and we'd like to invite you to join me on stage for one song during the San Antonio concert. Would you be interested in singing Amarillo Morning with me in front of 20,000 people?" The silence that followed was profound. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched her son's face transform with disbelief, joy, and a touch of fear. "Really?" Marcus whispered. "You want me to sing with you on stage?" "I can't think of anyone I'd rather share that song with," George replied sincerely. "You've already proven you know how to sing it with real meaning. Now it's time to share that gift with others." Sarah's mind raced with practical concerns, the enormity of performing in front of such a large crowd, the pressure on her still recovering son, the logistics of preparing for such a performance. But looking at Marcus's face, she saw something she hadn't seen since before the accident. Pure, unbridled joy. "What would this involve?" Sarah asked, trying to balance her protective instincts with her desire to support her son's dreams. George explained that Marcus would need to attend a few rehearsals with the band, learn to work with stage lighting and sound systems, and of course, practice performing in front of people. "We'll start small," he assured them. "Maybe a few practice sessions with just the band, then gradually build up his comfort level." "Mom, can I do it?" Marcus asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Please?" Sarah looked at her son, this brave, talented, loving boy who had grown up so much in the past few months, and realized that this opportunity was exactly what he needed to help him process everything they had been through together. "If you want to do it, sweetheart, then we'll make it happen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The next several months became a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. True to his word, George arranged for Marcus to attend rehearsals with his touring band, starting with small, informal sessions at a local recording studio. The first time Marcus walked into the studio and saw the professional musicians setting up their equipment, he felt overwhelmed by the reality of what he had agreed to do. Jake Morrison, George's fiddle player, who had been part of the hospital concerts, immediately put Marcus at ease. "Hey there, superstar," he said with a warm smile. "Ready to make some real music?" Tommy Chen, the acoustic guitarist, was equally welcoming. "Marcus, I've been looking forward to this. George has told us so much about your natural talent." The first rehearsal was tentative, but promising. Marcus's voice, while still young, had a quality that complemented George's perfectly. More importantly, his emotional connection to the song was evident in every note he sang. "That's it right there," George said after their first run-through of Amarillo Morning. "You're not just singing the words, you're telling a story. That's what makes a great performer." Over the following weeks, Marcus attended rehearsals twice a week, gradually building his confidence and stage presence. Sarah often stayed to watch, amazed by her son's natural ability and the patience and kindness shown by George and his entire team. Dr. Hernandez, who had become something of a family friend since Sarah's recovery, was fascinated by the therapeutic aspects of Marcus's musical journey. During one of Sarah's follow-up appointments, she observed, "Music therapy is well documented as beneficial for recovery and emotional processing. What Marcus is doing, preparing for this performance, is helping him work through the trauma of nearly losing you in a very positive, constructive way." As the concert date approached, word began to spread through the local community about Marcus's upcoming performance. The story of the boy who sang his mother back to consciousness had touched many hearts, and people were excited to witness this next chapter of their journey. 2 weeks before the concert, George arranged for Marcus to perform for a small audience at a local venue, about 200 people, including hospital staff who had cared for Sarah, teachers from Marcus's school, and neighbors who had supported the family during their difficult time. Standing on stage for the first time, microphone in hand, Marcus felt a moment of panic as he looked out at the sea of faces looking back at him. But then he saw his mother in the front row, giving him an encouraging smile and a thumbs up, and he remembered why he was there. "This song means a lot to my family," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I sang it to my mom when she was in the hospital, and now I get to sing it with George Strait because sometimes music can heal people." When George joined him on stage and the band began the familiar opening notes of Amarillo Morning, Marcus felt all his anxiety melt away. This wasn't about performing, it was about sharing something beautiful with people who cared about them. The small audience was deeply moved by the performance. Many had tears in their eyes as they listened to the young boy whose voice carried such maturity and emotion, backed by one of country music's greatest legends. After the song ended and the applause died down, George put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the audience, "I've been performing for over 40 years. And I can honestly say that singing with this young man has been one of the greatest honors of my career." The success of the small venue performance gave Marcus the confidence he needed for the main event. On the night of the San Antonio concert, as he stood backstage at the Alamo Dome, listening to 20,000 people singing along to George's hits, he felt nervous, but ready. Sarah stood beside him, wearing the special backstage pass that still seemed surreal to her. "Are you ready for this, sweetheart?" "I think so," Marcus replied, adjusting the small cowboy hat that George had given him as a good luck charm. "Mom, thank you for letting me do this." "Thank you for being brave enough to try," Sarah replied, kissing his forehead. "Dad would be so proud of you." As George finished "Check yes or no," and the crowd roared its approval, he walked to the microphone for what had become his traditional moment of connection with the audience. "Tonight is special for me for many reasons," George began, his voice carrying clearly through the massive venue. "This tour is about saying goodbye, but it's also about celebrating the music that has connected us all these years. Music has the power to heal, to bring people together, and to remind us of what's truly important in life." The crowd quieted, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "A few months ago, I met a young man who taught me something about courage, about love, and about the real power of music. His mother was in the hospital, and he spent weeks singing to her, believing that she could hear him even when the doctors weren't sure she would ever wake up." George paused, looking out at the sea of faces hanging on his every word. "That young man was right," His mother did wake up, and I believe music played a part in her healing. Tonight, I want to share the stage with someone who understands what country music is really about, not just the melodies and the words, but the heart and soul behind them. The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus walked onto the stage, his small figure dwarfed by the massive production, but his presence commanding attention. He waved shyly at the audience, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people, but drawing strength from his mother's presence backstage and George's encouraging presence beside him. "This is Marcus Johnson," George announced, "and he's going to help me sing Amarillo Morning." As the band began the gentle opening notes, Marcus stepped up to his microphone and began to sing. His young voice, amplified throughout the massive venue, carried with it all the emotion and hope that had sustained him through his mother's recovery. When the evening falls and the daylight dies, the last of the sun cuts through like a knife. 20,000 people fell silent, captivated by the pure, honest emotion in the boy's voice. Many in the audience knew the story behind his presence on stage, and those who didn't could sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary. When George joined in for the chorus, the blend of their voices created something magical, the seasoned performer's rich tone, complemented by the young boy's clear, hopeful sound. The fiddle and guitar wove around their voices, creating a musical tapestry that seemed to embrace the entire audience. As the song continued, Marcus's confidence grew. He began to move slightly with the music, his natural stage presence emerging as he lost himself in the performance. This wasn't about being nervous or impressing anyone. This was about sharing something beautiful with people who understood the power of music to heal and inspire. During the instrumental break, George stepped over to Marcus and said something that only the boy could hear, causing Marcus to smile broadly. When they came back together for the final chorus, both of them were singing with pure joy, their voices rising together toward the arena's ceiling. As the last notes faded away, the silence lasted for several heartbeats before the audience erupted in the loudest, most sustained applause of the entire evening. 20,000 people rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes, as they celebrated not just a musical performance, but a triumph of human spirit. George and Marcus took their bows together, and as the applause continued, George pulled the boy close and said, "Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Backstage after the show, Sarah embraced her son with pride and gratitude that seemed to overflow from her heart. "Marcus, that was absolutely beautiful. You were incredible up there." "It felt amazing, Mom," Marcus replied, still glowing from the experience. "I wasn't scared at all once we started singing. It just felt right." George approached them, still wearing his performance clothes, but with his hat in his hands and genuine emotion on his face. "Sarah, Marcus, I can't thank you enough for sharing this journey with me. Tonight was special, not just for the audience, but for me personally." "George, we're the ones who should be thanking you," Sarah replied. "You've given Marcus, given both of us, something we'll treasure forever." As the evening wound down and the arena emptied, the three of them sat together in George's dressing room, sharing stories and reflecting on how far they had all come since that first day in the hospital room. "What's next for you, Marcus?" George asked. "Are you thinking about pursuing music seriously?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I love singing, and tonight was amazing. But I think I want to be a doctor like Dr. Hernandez, so I can help people the way she helped Mom." George smiled at the boy's thoughtful response. "That's a wonderful goal. And you know what? Doctors who understand the healing power of music make the very best kind of healers." As they prepared to leave the arena, George had one final surprise. "Marcus, I want you to have something," he said, reaching into a guitar case and pulling out a beautiful acoustic guitar. "This is the guitar I used when we first sang together in the hospital. I want you to keep practicing, keep sharing your gift with others. Marcus accepted the guitar with reverence, understanding that he was receiving not just an instrument, but a legacy of using music to touch lives and bring healing to others. "I promise I'll practice every day," Marcus said solemnly, "and I'll always remember what you taught me about music coming from the heart." As the Johnson family drove home that night, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had nearly died, and her young son had faced the possibility of losing his only remaining parent. Tonight, that same son had performed with one of country music's biggest stars in front of 20,000 people, and he had done so with confidence, grace, and a maturity that amazed everyone who witnessed it. "Mom," Marcus said from the back seat, carefully holding his new guitar, "do you think Dad would have been proud of what happened tonight?" Sarah looked at her son in the rearview mirror, seeing so much of his father in his earnest expression and thoughtful nature. "Sweetheart, I know he would have been bursting with pride. He always said that music was one of God's greatest gifts, and tonight you shared that gift with thousands of people." As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah realized that while their story had included tremendous challenges and heartbreak, it had ultimately become a story of hope, healing, and the incredible power of human connection. The boy who had sung his mother back to consciousness had become a young man who understood that music and love could indeed work miracles. 1 year later, Marcus Johnson stood in the hallway of University Hospital, but this time he wasn't there as a frightened child keeping vigil over his unconscious mother. Instead, he was there as a young volunteer, guitar case in hand, preparing to visit patients in the pediatric ward as part of a music therapy program that had been established in honor of his and his mother's experience. The program, called Songs of Hope, had been quietly funded by George Strait and administered by the hospital's child life specialists. Marcus, now 9 years old and considerably more confident than the scared 8-year-old who had first met his musical hero, visited the hospital twice a week to sing for patients and their families. Dr. Hernandez had been instrumental in developing the program, having witnessed firsthand the therapeutic benefits of music during Sarah's recovery. "We've seen remarkable results," she explained to Sarah during one of their regular coffee meetings. "Children who are facing serious illnesses or long hospital stays respond so positively to live music, especially when it's performed by someone who truly understands what they're going through." On this particular afternoon, Marcus was scheduled to visit a 7-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez, who had been in the hospital for 2 weeks following a severe asthma attack. When he entered her room, he found her sitting up in bed, looking bored and homesick. "Hi, Emma," Marcus said, introducing himself with the easy confidence he had developed over months of hospital visits. "I'm Marcus, and I'm here to play some music, if you'd like to listen." Emma's eyes lit up when she saw the guitar case. "You're going to play music? Real music?" "Absolutely real music," Marcus replied, setting up a small chair beside her bed. "Do you have any favorite songs?" For the next 30 minutes, Marcus played a mix of children's songs, contemporary hits, and yes, a few George Strait classics. Emma sang along enthusiastically, and by the time the session ended, her mood had transformed completely. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Emma asked as Marcus packed up his guitar. "I'll be here on Thursday," Marcus promised, "and if you'd like, I can teach you some guitar chords." As Marcus left Emma's room, he reflected on how much his life had changed in the past year. The scared, desperate boy who had sung to his unconscious mother had evolved into a confident young man who understood the power of music to heal and comfort others. His academic performance had improved dramatically since his mother's recovery, and his teachers consistently remarked on his maturity and empathy. At home, he practiced guitar religiously, often playing the songs that had become so meaningful during their family's darkest period. Sarah, meanwhile, had been promoted to head nurse in the pediatric intensive care unit, a position that allowed her to work closely with families facing the same fears and uncertainties she had experienced. Her own journey had given her unique insight into what families needed during medical crises, and she had become known throughout the hospital for her exceptional compassion and understanding. On this anniversary of her awakening, Sarah was working the evening shift when she received an unexpected visitor. George Strait appeared at the nurse's station, wearing his characteristic hat and warm smile. "George!" Sarah exclaimed, coming around the desk to greet him with a warm hug. "What brings you here tonight?" "I was in town for a recording session, and I couldn't resist stopping by to see how you and Marcus are doing. Plus, I heard about this music therapy program that's been making quite an impact." Sarah beamed with pride as she told George about Marcus's volunteer work and the positive response from patients and families. "He's found his calling, I think. He loves performing, but what really drives him is seeing how music helps other children cope with difficult situations." "That doesn't surprise me at all," George replied. "That boy has always understood what music is really about. Is he here today?" "He should be finishing up with his last patient visit right about now," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Room 318. There's a little girl named Emma who's become quite attached to him." George made his way to room 318, where he found Marcus putting away his guitar while Emma pleaded for just one more song. "How about I help with that one more song?" George said from the doorway, causing both Marcus and Emma to look up in shock. "Mr. Strait!" Marcus jumped up to greet his friend and mentor. "I didn't know you were coming today." Emma's mouth fell open as she realized who had just entered her room. "Are you really George Strait? Like the real George Strait?" "I am indeed," George replied, tipping his hat to the young girl. "And I hear you've been enjoying some music with my friend Marcus here." For the next 20 minutes, George and Marcus performed an impromptu concert for Emma and several other patients whose families had gathered in the hallway after word spread that the country music legend was in the building. The music filled the pediatric ward with warmth and joy, temporarily transforming the clinical environment into something magical. As they sang Amarillo Morning together, the song that had started their friendship, George marveled at how much Marcus's voice had matured over the past year. The boy's natural talent had been refined through practice and performance. But more importantly, his understanding of music's emotional power had deepened through his work with hospitalized children. After the impromptu concert ended and the excited families returned to their rooms, George, Marcus, and Sarah found themselves in the same family conference room where Dr. Hernandez had first delivered encouraging news about Sarah's recovery. "Marcus, I have to tell you how proud I am of what you're doing here," George said. "When I first met you, I saw a young man with incredible courage and love for his mother. Now I see someone who's using that same courage and love to help other families going through difficult times." Marcus smiled, but his expression was thoughtful. "Mr. Strait, I learned something this year. When I was singing to Mom, I thought I was just trying to help her get better, but I realized that the music was helping me too. It gave me hope when I was scared, and it made me feel less alone." "That's exactly right," George replied. "Music is a gift that keeps giving. It helps the person performing it just as much as the people listening." Sarah listened to this exchange with deep gratitude, understanding that George had given her son much more than just performance opportunities. He had helped Marcus discover his own capacity for healing others, turning a traumatic experience into a source of strength and purpose. "George, I can never adequately thank you for everything you've done for our family," Sarah said. "You didn't just visit us in the hospital, you became part of our lives, and you've helped Marcus find his way to help others." George shook his head dismissively. "Sarah, you've got it backwards. You and Marcus gave me something invaluable. You reminded me why I started making music in the first place. It's not about fame or success. It's about connecting with people and being part of something larger than yourself. As the evening progressed, George shared news about his recent retirement from touring and his plans to focus more on songwriting and mentoring young artists. "Actually," he said, looking at Marcus with a slight smile, "I've been working on a new song, and I was hoping you might help me with it." Marcus's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? You want me to help you write a song?" "Well, it's already mostly written," George admitted. "But it's about a young man who saves his mother through the power of music and then goes on to help others. I thought you might have some insights into how that story should be told." Over the next hour, George played the rough version of the song on Marcus's guitar, while the boy listened intently and offered suggestions. The song, titled "Songs of Hope," told the story of their meeting and the ripple effects of kindness and music that had followed. "The bridge isn't quite right yet," George explained. "It needs something about how helping others helps heal your own heart." Marcus thought for a moment, then sang softly. "When you sing for someone else's pain, you find your own heart healing too. The music that you give away comes back as something strong and true." George's face lit up as he heard the words. "That's it, exactly. Marcus, you've got the soul of a songwriter." As they refined the lyrics together, Sarah watched her son collaborate with his hero and mentor, struck by how natural their musical partnership had become. This wasn't a famous performer indulging a young fan. This was a genuine creative collaboration between two people who understood music's power to transform lives. Later that evening, as George prepared to leave the hospital, he walked with Sarah and Marcus through the same corridors where their friendship had begun exactly 1 year earlier. "You know," George said as they passed room 314, which was currently empty, "I've been thinking about that first day I met you two. I came here thinking I was doing a favor for a family in need. I had no idea that I was about to meet two people who would change my perspective on everything." They paused outside the room where Sarah had spent 3 weeks fighting for her life, while Marcus maintained his faithful vigil. The memories were still vivid for all of them, but they no longer carried the weight of fear and desperation. Instead, they had become part of a story about the triumph of love, faith, and human connection. "Mr. Strait," Marcus said quietly, "do you think Mom would have gotten better even without the music?" George considered the question carefully, understanding its importance to the young boy. "Marcus, I believe your mother would have fought to come back to you no matter what, because that's how much she loves you. But I also believe that music, and especially your voice singing to her, gave her something extra to fight for. It reminded her of all the beautiful things waiting for her when she woke up." Sarah nodded, agreeing with George's thoughtful response. "Sweetheart, the doctors and medicine helped my body heal, but your voice and your love helped my heart and soul find their way back to you." As they reached the hospital's main entrance, George turned to face both Sarah and Marcus. "I want you both to know that our friendship means the world to me. You've enriched my life in ways I'm still discovering." "Does this mean you won't visit us anymore?" Marcus asked, a hint of worry in his voice. George laughed warmly. "Are you kidding? I'm retired from touring, which means I have more time for the important things, like watching you grow up and continuing to help with the Songs of Hope program. You're stuck with me for the long haul." As they said their goodbyes that evening, all three of them understood that their story had come full circle. What had begun as a chance encounter during a family's darkest hour had evolved into a lasting friendship built on shared values, mutual respect, and a common understanding of music's power to heal. Marcus continued his volunteer work at the hospital, touching the lives of dozens of young patients and their families. His confidence as a performer grew, but more importantly, his compassion and understanding deepened with each visit. Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed purpose, using her own experience to help other families navigate medical crises. She became known throughout the San Antonio medical community for her exceptional patient advocacy and her ability to provide comfort during the most difficult times. George remained true to his word, visiting regularly and staying involved with the Songs of Hope program. He also continued working with Marcus on songwriting, recognizing in the young man a rare combination of musical talent and emotional depth. 6 months later, during a small fundraising concert for the hospital, George and Marcus performed Songs of Hope for the first time in public. The song, which told their story while protecting their privacy, became an instant favorite among the audience of medical professionals, families, and community supporters. As they took their bows that evening, Sarah watched from the audience with tears of joy and gratitude. Her son, this brave, talented, compassionate young man, had not only survived their family's greatest trial, but had used it as a foundation for helping others. The scared little boy who had sung his mother back to consciousness had become a young man who understood that life's most difficult moments could be transformed into opportunities for service, kindness, and hope. And in the process, he had shown everyone around him, including a country music legend, the true meaning of strength, faith, and the healing power of love expressed through music. In room 314, where their journey had begun, a small plaque now hung beside the door, in honor of all the families who find strength in love, hope in music, and healing in each other. It served as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most profound miracles happen not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of one person refusing to give up on another. The song that had brought them together, Amarillo Morning, continued to play throughout the hospital's music therapy program, sung by volunteers, patients, and families who found in its lyrics a message of hope and renewal. And somewhere in San Antonio, a young boy with an acoustic guitar continued to believe in the power of music to heal hearts, strengthen spirits, and remind everyone who heard him that love, in all its forms, could indeed work miracles.